Hi, everybody, and welcome. We're going to get this kicked off pretty much on time. Thank you for coming to the Science Division pop-up lecture series, and thanks to Paula for being the motive force behind them. I'm Dave Krause. I'm a curator of vertebrate paleontology here. I currently serve as interim director of Earth and Space Sciences for the next 26 days, not that I'm counting. But I want to give you actually a little bit more background because it provides context for this lecture. I've been here since 2016. I came from a career, 34-year career at Stony Brook University, where I was teaching primarily human anatomy to medical and dental students. And I came here on an agreement that I would be here working half-time for 3 years. 3 years expired. The museum foolishly asked me back. And now I've been here entering my 8th year, working full-time and for another 26 days. And I love this place so much and the people that I work with that I'm beginning to get the sense that I might be leaving here feet first. That was a joke. But enough about me. This is about the Madagascar Paleontology project, a project I started when I was at Stony Brook University about 3 decades ago. And it's mostly about the science adjacent stuff, the things that potentially and hopefully make the science even better. And I made the title provocative because I seriously want your help in evaluating and judging if what we are doing there with the science adjacent stuff makes sense. And if not, I want your help in providing clues on how to make it even better. But first, let me introduce you to Madagascar. Madagascar, most everyone knows, is an island off the southeast coast of Africa, but not everybody knows how big it is. It looks small next to Africa, but it's in fact over twice the size of Colorado. It's a huge island. And on that island are 30 million people, another fact that few people know. These are amongst the most abandoned and forgotten people on the planet. Madagascar is the 3rd poorest country in the world. Just as one indicator, one metric, the median annual salary is $398 per year. And the people in the rural areas, like in this field area where we work, are even worse off because they have virtually no access to education and health care. And for context here, each of these is a full family dwelling, and the average Malagasy woman in the rural areas has about 6 children. These are roughly 10 by 12 feet in size, have sometimes mud walls, tin walls, grass roofs, and mud floors. So imagine a family of 8 living, cooking, eating, sleeping in what is equivalent to a small bedroom in a house or apartment in North America. But despite the poverty, it's absolutely rich in biodiversity. And so this just gives you a sampling of some of the biodiversity. There's over 12,000 species of plants. For comparison, Colorado has a little over 3,000. And 84% of those plants are endemic to the island. And if we look at the vertebrate animals, the ones that I'm most interested in, the ones that live there today, we've got a range of really bizarre animals, tomato frogs, all kinds of lizards, including this tiny chameleon, which is arguably the smallest lizard on the planet, rare plowshare tortoises, leaf-nosed snakes, tenrecs, and of course the signature group, the lemurs. None of these are found anywhere else in the world. There's about 1,130 species of extant terrestrial vertebrates, in other words, animals, backboned animals that live on the ground, and almost all of them are endemic to Madagascar, found nowhere else in the world. And one of the questions that intrigued me in the early 1990s was how those animals got there and when they got there and from where did they come. And at the time, it was stated in the literature, that this was the greatest unsolved mystery of natural history. That's not what this talk is about. I'll just give you a few snippets of that before moving on to the science adjacent stuff. But the bottom line is that we've had incredible success. We've hit a mother lode of fossils, and they're really cool fossils, some of which are arrayed out in front of us. We have focused our work up here in what's called the Majunga geological basin, depositional basin. And we've had about 14 expeditions. Most of these last 5 to 6 weeks. They consist of anywhere between 15 and 30 participants, except for the ones in 2011 and 2023. Those are relatively small expeditions. And like I said, we've hit this mother lode of great fossils, a whole array. I'll just give you a few snippets of some of them. So here, for instance, is, and all of them are new to science. In other words, we discovered them, described them, and named them. And this one we named Beelzebufo. It basically means the devil toad or the frog from hell, in part because it's so big. So this is Beelzebufo here, facing off against the largest extant frog that lives in Madagascar today, as well as the number 2 pencil. So it's a huge animal. It's right down in front of you, right in front of me here. This is Sahunachiles, again, a new turtle described along with Tyler Leeson. And I have to put this in, otherwise Tyler would get on me. But this is bizarre in the sense that it has this gape and suction feeding that is unique to this whole group of turtles to which it belongs. This is Simasuchus. Simasuchus is a crocodile, believe it or not. Most good card-carrying crocodiles have got a long, skinny snout and conical teeth for catching prey. This is the top of the skull here, the skull in front view here, part of the skeleton. And you can see that it's got a pug-nosed snout, and the teeth are actually not conical. They're leaf-shaped, and this kind of adaptation is used for eating plants. So this is actually a vegetarian crocodile, and it doesn't get much more bizarre than that. This is Majungasaurus, indicated over here, and it's peculiar in having this very peculiar dome on the top of its skull and these tiny forelimbs. This is a Mashikasaurus, very odd in having, it's unique in having these teeth point straight forward, and I don't have the species name up here. It's named Knopfleri, and you'll have to ask Julia Spalding Beagles about that name because it pertains to her, I think, second cousin. Long story, don't have time to get into it. This is a Dolotherium, which literally means crazy beast, and this is a beautiful skeleton, arguably, well, it is, quite frankly, the most complete and best preserved skeleton of a Mesozoic mammal from the entire southern hemisphere. It's depicted here looking kind of like an ordinary badger, but in fact, it's totally bizarre. It's got a whole range of features, including these peculiar holes in the top of its skull and this intranasal vacuity, which is unique amongst all mammals living or extinct. So the bottom line on all of this, I can kind of summarize in 2 sentences. I could talk for 2 hours as well, but in 2 sentences, summarizing 30 years of research, it is that, number one, if you live on an island in isolation for millions of years, you get weird. And the other one is that the ancestors of the modern vertebrates probably got to Madagascar after the end of the Cretaceous and by crossing a significant marine barrier. And this is supported by work in molecular biology, looking at divergence times and a number of other things. And here I'm just using mammals as an example. So here are some of the science highlights. We've discovered about 25,000 specimens. The vast majority of them are in collections downstairs. We've described 21 new genera and 22 new species. We've published 4 monographic volumes, 120 peer-reviewed scientific articles, 17 of them in the high-impact journals Nature and Science, 10 book chapters, had lots of co-authors, researchers from around the world. 51 of them are graduate and undergraduate students. And we produced 7 master's theses and 10 PhD dissertations. And specimens from this project are displayed in about 40 institutions around the world. So that's a whole lot of bragging. But I do so in part for 2 reasons. One is this has involved a whole bunch of people that deserve credit for working their tails off to get this material collected, prepared, both mechanically and digitally, to accession, cataloged, and described in the context of some pretty broad scientific questions. And the other reason is that, quite frankly, these are some of the best skeletons and skulls of animals that lived at that time. They're the best representatives for huge groups that lived in the southern hemisphere. So they've been kind of game-changing, and in that sense, they almost write scientific articles by themselves because they're so cool. So there's lots to talk about there, but I want to segue quickly to the science-adjacent stuff, what we've been doing in Madagascar, and I'm actually going to ask you to determine and hopefully tell me at the end, either here or privately or in emails or whatever, if you feel that what we're doing makes sense. So the decision here is this what we're doing, science with a social conscience, where everything is peachy keen, or is it neocolonialism, which is obviously the opposite of peachy keen, whatever that is, awful, terrible, inappropriate, horrendous, so on and so forth. And this comes to mind in part recently because there are a whole number of articles being written in the news and in science journals about neocolonialism in paleontology. And so here, for instance, countries demand their fossils back, forcing natural history museums to confront their past. Down here, colonial history and global economics distort our understanding of deep time diversity, why smuggled fossils are hurting paleontology, and on, listing a few examples from individual countries. And then here, a recent article, Our Past Creates Our Present, a brief overview of racism, and I would add sexism in there as well, and colonialism in Western paleontology. And I want to point out that one of the leaders in this work is our most recent postdoc in the Department of Earth Sciences, Annika Clement, and I commend her for drawing attention to this issue. So let's dig into that a little bit more. So using this article by Riley Black on smuggled fossils, and she makes this statement: paleontology often relies on researchers from North America and Western Europe building their reputations on fossils from other parts of the world. Guilty as charged, without involving local researchers or giving back to local communities. I plead not guilty. So let's dive into what she refers to as parachute science and lingering colonialism. And these are kind of defined in this article. Parachute science, where researchers generally from high-income countries drop in to other countries to conduct research and leave without any engagement with the local community, including local researchers. And then colonialism, instances where when the expertise of local researchers is devalued and laws within those countries are violated. Again, I'd like to plead not guilty, but you can shed light on that at the end. So I'm not here to pass judgment on other paleontological projects. That's not my goal here. My goal is to basically tell you what we've been trying to do, not just in these most recent years when attention is being drawn to this, but from the very beginning, because we felt that it was the right thing to do. And I have to give the caveat there: have we done everything perfectly well? Absolutely not. Are there more things that we can do? Absolutely. But I would like to give you a quick rundown on what we have done and still do today, and group it into 6 different categories. First of all, we've collected and exported fossils and returned them legally. We've contributed to building paleontological infrastructure in Madagascar. We provided training for Malagasy graduate students. We've collaborated with Malagasy colleagues and students on research. We've engaged the general public in Madagascar, and we've worked with local communities, especially children. And so I want to pick apart each one of those and try to demonstrate where we think we've been doing things that make sense. So these 6 different parts: first of all, the legal matters. We have a series of collaboration agreements with various ministries of the government of Madagascar, as well as our collaborating university, the University of Antananarivo. And these are consistent with the ethics code of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, which you can read. We will conduct our field collection with all necessary permissions and permits and abide by all relevant local, national, and international laws and ordinances, rules, and regulations. And this is our most recent collaboration agreement, again with the Malagasy government, several different ministries, and the University of Antananarivo, between all of them and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And this is the documentation. This is generally done with official stamps in Madagascar. So these are the official stamps of various ministers of various ministries. And then over here, basically, George, the chair of the Board of Trustees, the VP of Science, and several others of us came to this agreement. And the agreement really has three basic parts to it. First of all field seasons require separate permits. So every year we have to apply, and every year we get evaluated, and sometimes we get access and sometimes we don't. All collected specimens can be exported for preparation. Well, why is this? It's because Madagascar is such a poor country, and they don't have the facilities at the University of Antananarivo, the specialized facilities for preparation, and nor do they have the training. We're working on that, but they don't have it now. And that's the reason for exporting everything, so they can come to labs like we have on the third floor and first floor here, so those fossils can be, and many of them are incredibly delicate, can be prepared out for future use. And then the third part is that all holotypes, and holotypes are basically the single specimen on which a new taxon is based. And so Adalatherium hui is based on a single specimen. And 1/2 of all other specimens must be returned to Madagascar upon completion of study. And that 1/2, you could pick that apart and say, well, you can just give them a lousy specimen and we keep the best one. We don't do that. And we're very conscious about this. And in fact, we have had Malagasy researchers here that help us divide those things. So an example here is that there might be a femur of Majungasaurus. Well, one goes to Madagascar and one stays here going forward. So again, you might ask, why not send everything back? And there's some reason for it. And there's a recent article just this year about calamities that happen in natural history museums. And they make the statement that significant collections in natural history museums have been destroyed or damaged through insurrections, cyclones, wars, fires, floods, or earthquakes, 57 institutions across 30 countries. And that doesn't even take into account the poorest of countries that don't have any facilities to store fossils, much less to prepare them. And then the solution is simple: where possible, spread material, preferably globally, to minimize the risk of loss in any one museum disaster. And and then this is bolstered by another very recent article by Dillon et al., where they talk about dividing up, they discuss the rationale of dividing up collections, because it provides greater accessibility for the research community to see specimens if they're in different places. And if this isn't done, it can become a logistical or financial issue, especially for younger, more poorly funded researchers, and a political issue when travel restrictions are in place. And we've faced this numerous times in Madagascar, where the government is unstable, and there's been military coups during the time of this project. And then finally, now in the age of data acquisition, 3D data acquisition, we can actually share data files across the world. So that helps to some degree. This is perhaps the boldest conclusion I have that, again, feel free to pick apart. But my statement is that leaving all specimens in Madagascar where they could not be collected and safely extracted from rock matrix, there's a big qualifier there, yet we're working on it, or returning all specimens after processing is too deceptively simple and short-sighted and ultimately counterproductive for all concerned. It hurts all of us. It doesn't progress the science either here or in Madagascar. Second of the 6 points is that we are working on building paleontological infrastructure in Madagascar. We built a two-room collections facility at the University of Antananarivo. It has a classroom associated with it, as well as a collections manager office. And this was built in 2015 and funded by Stony Brook University, where I used to be. And the DMNS really pitched in because of the Avenir Collection Center. There were many steel case cabinets, and 80 of them were actually sent to the University of Antananarivo into that collection facility, as well as to the Ministry of Mines. And this is an image of one of the rooms of the collections facilities, and these are some of the steel case cabinets that are in place there, donated by the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. This is the classroom that was built. And this was Inauguration Day. It was a big deal in Madagascar. This is a plaque that was put up. The Prime Minister of the country attended, several government ministers. This is the Minister of Higher Education giving an inauguration speech about this dedication. Again, a big deal. I'm lumping third and fourth parts because they're hard to tease apart. Training and collaborative involvement. We've trained many Malagasy students, 36 of them, and several of them, 9 of them, have come back on multiple field trips in field methods, and we now are doing collections management training and fossil preparation training here at the DMNS. And we've served on a number of graduate student committees, and the result has been 7 Malagasy master's theses and 3 PhD dissertations, and about to be a 4th, which I will soon report. And we brought colleagues, both students and professionals, here to the United States to work on some of the fossils with us and have access to some of the technology that is not accessible in Madagascar. And then finally, they are co-authors on 34 publications. And this is not nearly the number that we wanted to be at, but we expect that this number will increase a lot once we conduct more training. And then finally, we provided a number of seminars and workshops in Madagascar. So a few visuals to demonstrate that. So this is one of our very early field crews, and you can see that we've got a number of graduate students with us right from the very beginning. At least one of them, this lady here, Madame Lydia, she is now a professor at the University of Antananarivo. You might recognize a few folks here. That's me, the guy with the skinny legs. Over here is Pat O'Connor. And John has given me clearance to announce to all of you that Pat will be the next director in 26 days of Earth and Space Sciences, and very, very excited about having Pat come here. Back in 1998, he was a graduate student at Stony Brook University. And another fellow you might recognize is over here, Scott Sampson, who was the VP of Science, at that time Research and Collections, and he's also well known as Dr. Scott, the paleontologist of dinosaur train fame. This is a later field season, 2015. Again, please recognize the very active participation of Malagasy scientists in this project. And these are people that have been associated with the museum, and in some cases still are. And one that I would like to point out right here is Bakuli Rakutuzafi. This is when Bakuli was a beginning graduate student. She is about soon to finish her PhD dissertation, and she has been at the museum here for almost a year, and will unfortunately be leaving us in the middle of December. Bakuli, you want to just raise your hand and say hi? That's Bakuli. And there'll be more about Bakuli as I proceed through this. And then finally, the most recent field season, a relatively small and short one, was led by Pat O'Connor, who's now a joint leader of this project, and included the incomparable Natalie Toth, our preparator, and another Malagasy professor who I will talk about in a second, Hasna Randrianali. So this is just a slide showing our project geologist leading a training session on field methods. This is demonstrating that we did bring Hasna and Bakuli here in November and December of last year for 2 months of collections management training. And here they're getting training with Kristen McKenzie, and Hasna returned to Madagascar in December, and we were able to find funding to, fortunately, to keep Bakuli here. And so here are Bakuli and Hasna getting some training in in fossil preparation, along with Sadie Sherman. And this is Mike Richardson, one of our ACE volunteers, who's very skilled in cavity mount preparation, teaching Hasna Bakuli, and then Hasna applying that knowledge on her own. Bakuli will be going back in mid-December and then defending her PhD dissertation. And I'm going to invite Bakuli up at the end of the talk in case you have any questions at all about the project or about Madagascar that are better directed at her. So feel free to ask those questions. So this is just kind of a spray of papers to demonstrate that we have involved Malagasy paleontologists in this work. And like I said, it's just kind of a spray, only a few of them. Yeah, we're very proud of their involvement. And this is Pat O'Connor, I think last year, doing a workshop back at the University of Antananarivo to both geology and paleontology graduate students. And then we tried to engage the public to make them more aware of their very rich natural heritage in Madagascar. And this has involved putting up some roadside displays, donating casts of skulls and mounted skeletons, publishing a booklet, an informative booklet on the dinosaurs of this one major field area, giving public talks, and doing countless interviews for TV, radio, newspapers, and magazines. There's a thirst for this kind of knowledge. So these are some of the roadside displays very close to our field area, but it's along a major thoroughfare between the capital city and a resort city to the northwest. This is a very well-traveled skeleton of Majungasaurus. It's been in the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Mines. It's been at the University of Antananarivo, and it's even been in the presidential palace. So Majungasaurus really got around. This is the colored pamphlet I wrote, and we distributed it at any public event in Madagascar. It's written in Malagasy. This is me giving one of many public lectures in Madagascar. Whoops. I guess we're there. And then finally, the sixth of the 6 points is working with local communities. And this work is, we've done a number of different things. We built 6 schools because at the time that we began our work in this field area, nobody had the ability to read and write. And now we've built 5 primary schools and 1 secondary school. We've renovated an orphanage. We support the high-achieving schools that make it through the secondary school to go to high school and even university in the nearest city, so we support their room and board, and we provide chaperones for them. We rent their house and so on. We support university graduates, students that have gone through the whole thing and want to give back to their own communities in various sustainability ventures. And then we provided monthly medical clinics using, most recently, Malagasy physicians. And we provided annual dental clinics with mostly Stony Brook University dental teams. This was suspended during COVID, and now we're using some Malagasy dentists and bringing them into these remote areas. And then finally, we've made potable water accessible to about 24,000 villagers. So these are some of the kids that we were first introduced to in Madagascar, and they were fascinated by us because we had things that they'd never seen before. Pens, paper, and then finally color picture books, and then cameras, and then later on laptop computers, and then ultimately handheld GPS units. And you can imagine how puzzling those were and how intriguing they were for people who don't have an education. And so education is key, and it's something that is strongly desired by the local people as well. And we found this out in part because the kids would follow us everywhere. They were fascinated by what we were doing and what we had. And so we started asking them, you know, it's a Monday, it's a Wednesday, it's a Thursday, why are you following us around? Why aren't you in school? And the answer was obvious. They're not in school because there was no school. And the other very sad part was that a lot of us had our own little kids at the time, and we were away from our own little kids, and these kids were just so wonderful, and they'd come to our camp and play with us. We had things that they desired and never had seen before, like soccer balls, and we'd give them extra food in our camps, and we get to know them really well. And the sad thing is we come back a following year and they weren't there. And they weren't there because they died of easily treatable diseases, respiratory infections, diarrheal disease, malaria is a big killer. So this is a very important meeting for me. In 1996, I met with the village elders, the village chief, in the only public building in the area, which was a Lutheran church, and basically said to the villagers, you know, you've been so kind to us. You've welcomed us into your community. You've helped us carry out dinosaur bones on occasion. What can we do to repay you for your kindness? And their answer actually took me aback because they said, we want an education for our children. And I wasn't quite prepared for that. And so I asked the obvious question, well, what would that cost? And they said, well, you can hire a teacher for $500 a year. That was a no-brainer. We went back to camp, raised $500, and we started a school. And this is not that school, but it's one like it. I didn't have a picture of that particular school, but this is the class. This is the first class that we supported. And so it was by kids sitting underneath a big mango tree with lots of shade, putting up a blackboard against the tree, and with one teacher. One thing led to another, and when I went back to Stony Brook, I started what is called the Madagascar Ankisi Fund. Ankisi means children in the Malagasy language, and it's dedicated to providing education and health care to kids living in remote areas of Madagascar. Again, when we got to this field area, nobody, kids or adults, could read and write. And at the time, my youngest son was in 8th grade. He was in an art class, asked the art teacher if they could have a logo contest, and this was the winning logo, not my son's. What it does is it takes the colors of the Malagasy flag and unites it by a rainbow between the school and our dinosaur. And the only downside is that it looks like our dinosaur is about to eat those little kids. Can't have everything. Anyway, these are the 6 schools that we have built. Again, in our field areas, we still run 4 of them. There's about 1,000 students that we support in these primary schools and the one secondary school. They are very active learners. They're very eager to learn. They've never had the opportunity before. And this is our very first school, and at the 20-year anniversary, the school started with 30 students. There are now about 190 students going to that school. We had to expand into 3 buildings from 1 building. I don't have a formal survey about whether it's working or not, but I have this informal survey, which is one day I went to visit this girl's parents. Her name is Naridra. And usually I have something in my pocket for the kids, and this day I had a piece of chalk, and she said, stop before you go in, I want to show you what I learned in school. And so she goes to the side of her house and starts writing sentences in French and doing some arithmetic. And many years later, I encountered Naridra again, and here she is as a young mother. That's her father. She is now an accountant, and she can support her immediate family as well as her extended family. because of an education. How we raised money, most of this was on Long Island when I was still there, and it was basically by doing school fundraisers. And I love this concept because school groups would raise money to help kids on the other side of the planet. We started Pen Pal, a system so that they could each learn about each other's country as well. As I said, some of the high-achieving students we support to go to the nearest city, and we put them up and feed them and provide them with school supplies. These are the high school students that from 1 year going to that high school in Majonga. And these are some graduates. I picked 3 of them. This is Yvonne, who's now a paramedic and a midwife. And over here is Armand, who went into business management in the field of agronomy. And Armand went back to his village and he said, I want to develop crops and I want to employ women to do that. And so he started a Women's Permaculture Association, and this is women tending their crops that weren't grown in this area before and providing much more nutrition than they had before. And this is harvest time, and you can see all of the, I think these are all peanuts right here. And then this is a student that we're currently trying to work with to develop a fish farm, and this is his graduation. He's doing a presentation in agronomy and aquaculture. This is him with his very, very proud family wearing their Sunday best. And I am collaborating with the humanitarian engineering program at the Colorado School of Mines to devise a fish farm. And that fish farm will obviously produce much needed protein, but then also the fish fertilizer can be used by the Women's Permaculture Association to fertilize their crops. That's the concept. In terms of healthcare, there's much need for healthcare. There's much malnutrition. There are lots of diseases, dental caries, and you name it, going on completely unchecked. But we have been doing now medical intervention for a number of years, which is, again, welcomed by the community. It's not that we're forcing anything on anybody. We always ask first, what can we do to help? And they want medical help. And so this has happened initially with Stony Brook University physicians and then later Malagasy physicians, but we've also had these large dental teams with portable dental units that go into these remote areas where there's no electricity. In terms of dentistry, mostly removing teeth because they're too far gone to save. And there's a flip side to this, which is that the dental students, this is after their 3rd year where they're very proficient in clinical techniques, they go, and many of these people have never, many of these, I'll call them kids, students, have never been outside of their own country, and they have these just profoundly life-changing experiences by helping the kids in Madagascar. And then finally, we're providing water to a large area. Some of that is by wells, but wells are limited because if you've been living next to a stream and drinking out of it for generations, no matter how good it is or how bad it is, you're not going to walk long distances. So we've devised another method which is used in Latin America a lot, which is by putting out clear bottles, whether they're glass or plastic, at an angle to the hot sun for 5 or 6 hours. It gets rid of 99.9% of the coliform bacteria. And this, I think, is a close-up of that. And then over here is an example of a little boy, Manubu, who was very, very sick for a long time. He drank clean water for 3 weeks, and he was just absolutely fine. The bottom line is the diarrheal disease is a big killer of these kids, and if you give them clean water, you'll cut diarrheal disease deaths in half for children under 5. So I've been rambling. Some of this is summarized. Some of the work is being summarized. The paleontological infrastructure and training is emphasized in a recent article in Catalyst, but I recently had published an article that covers a lot of this science-adjacent stuff in the Informal Learning Review. And I'm more than happy to send PDFs to anybody who sends me an email requesting one. And obviously, this is not a one-person show. There have been so many people involved in everything that we do, the science and the science-adjacent efforts. This is just a summary of all of the people to thank in that regard, and many of them are here at the DMNS in terms of colleagues and staff and students and interns and volunteers preparing fossils up in the prep lab. I thank you all, and I thank you for your attention here. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions, and you know the routine. Paula runs around with the cube microphone, but I'm also going to invite Bakuli up with me, and we can sit here on the stage. We can act like VPs and take questions that you might have. I have to turn this on.
Before I open it up to questions after this incredible talk, just a reminder, there's a bunch of talks coming up. So the 5th of October, Gar Spellman, The Marvelous Middle Ear of Birds. 23rd of October, Emily Lessner, What Can We Learn from Studying Crocodilians? October 26th, Michelle Coons and Megan Salas will be talking about their work in Peru. And 9 November is Martha McMillan giving you an anatomy lecture, and I'll be sending out an email about all of those upcoming lectures. So, questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation. Now, Dr. Krause, I'm going to ask you to do something very difficult. You've given a wonderful presentation about how your program is very heavily oriented towards social justice. But I'm going to ask you to put yourself in somebody else's shoes who might see what you're doing as neocolonial and explain why they would see that as neocolonial.
Oh boy.
Start with the easy one.
Yeah, that's not easy. And I said at the outset that we've tried to do things that we thought made sense and that were the right things to do. Somebody accusing me of neocolonialism would say, probably, why didn't you start doing some of this stuff earlier in the project? And I regret not starting some of this stuff earlier in the project. But yeah, I can provide excuses for that too. But it's mainly about starting this. I don't think I'm answering your question well, because in part because I think about this stuff all the time, and I try to think of ways that we can do things better in the future and not look back too much, because that's not that productive. I think that there's two ways to approach this. One is to draw attention to paleontological projects that are actually neocolonialists and have stuff in their museums that were not appropriately obtained. And it's good, like Annika is doing, to draw attention to that. Another way of dealing with this is to do our damnedest to provide good examples. Potentially, I wouldn't presume that I'm a good role model for anything, but that we do our best, and hopefully that will elevate the game a little bit through time. This is a slow process. The part that has been the slowest has been getting graduate students over here to the US for training. They want it, they desire it. It's a difficult thing financially. There are difficult things within the rules and regulations of various graduate programs. It's just tough. That's a rambling answer to a tough question. Thank you for it.
before we had an exhibit with Tiny the Torosaurus, there was a Madagascar exhibit on the level 2 bridge. Is there any possibility that we could have an updated version of that that might cover some of the subjects you talked about today?
Yeah, so I've got a two-part answer to that. One is that exhibit was based on primarily one fossil, a Dollotherium, that skeleton of a mammal, and there were a few other specimens there as well. And that was basically kind of a pop-up exhibit, just like this is a pop-up lecture, to hit what is current. And quite frankly, we gave that project our all in terms of scientific description and in the exhibit. So there's probably not much in terms of an update on that. But even before that, there was an exhibit here that featured a lot of our dinosaurs and many of the animals that are up here. Please feel free to come up afterwards and check these out. Many of these were on exhibit in a traveling exhibit called Ultimate Dinosaurs. And there has been a lot of work on those particular animals. But I don't know of it being in the cards, let's put it that way, to have an exhibit on our Madagascar fossils in the near future. These things take a long time to develop.
Hi. I have a question about some of the organizations that you all work with, and I'd like to know a little bit more about the other funding and support that you receive from Madagascar. So my question's sort of three parts. So one is, when you were developing, your sort of like arm of your work to be more socially conscious with the folks that you were working with and living with, what sorts of development programs or philosophies did you and your team sort of look at or take inspiration from as you were starting this sort of this effort? You talked about your schools and the medical work and all of that. And then the second part of my question is, when you're not there, when Stony Brook isn't there, when DMNS is not there, tell me more about the local government support and input. And you talked a little bit about at the national level, the different departments that work in support of the work, but what does it look like from Madagascar's perspective in terms of their input and their ongoing work with it when, the Westerners are not around?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second part first, which is that the Madagascar Ankisi Fund employs 2 in-country directors, and they run the show for me. So I'm in constant contact with them all the time. They ask me questions, I send them answers, and it's my responsibility to raise the funds for the Madagascar Ankisi Fund, and then we send them to Madagascar. That fund, the Ankisi Fund, is run through Stony Brook University, the not-for-profit wing of Stony Brook University, called the Stony Brook Foundation. So we have an active presence there. These 2 fellows are going out every day and seeing how they can improve situations. They monitor the high school students, for instance, when they get in trouble. There's close oversight by these 2 fellows. They're wonderfully dedicated to what they do. In terms of organizations that we work with, we intentionally don't. We intentionally try to fly under the radar as much as we can. We've chosen to not work with other organizations that are bureaucratically heavy and have huge indirect costs. And I do that in part because I was heavily influenced by a book by two New York Times bestselling authors, whose names right now I forget, but the book was called Half the Sky. And they make very strongly the point that the most effective organizations in dealing with problems on the ground are NGOs, small NGOs, not working with much larger organizations, including faith-based organizations that have a lot of overhead and a lot of rules and regulations that stifle flexibility. And so we have a very active presence on the ground. We're constantly going into the villages and saying, how can we help? What problems can we solve for you? And the one thing that we refuse to do is to get involved in internal village politics, but we get a sense from the entire community of what they feel is best that we can do. So in that sense, we like to stay lean and mean because I know that every penny goes to where it's intended. It doesn't go to overhead. That's not to say that there isn't a charge for administrative costs for any donation that goes to the Stony Brook Foundation. There is. They take off a small percentage, but then every penny goes to Madagascar and is put to use in the way that we intend.
Questions?
Hi, Dave. You kind of partially answered this with Chelsea's question, but you've been doing this for a long time, and as you get on with your career, are there points in place that someone will be a point person to be sure that this project continues on after you decide it's time for you to step down?
Yeah. By the time I hang up my boots or kick the bucket, I get it. And it's a very relevant question. And there are a number of people in our team that are dedicated to this as well. I mean, I will say that, I'm probably more passionate about it than anybody else, but I have some confidence that I will be able to hand over the torch and it'll be carried. And Pat O'Connor is one of them, but there are many other people who have been on the team for a very long time, the research team, that are dedicated to different parts of this, some of them more, say, to the paleontological infrastructure part, others more to the community part. I'm hoping that I don't have to hand the torch off anytime soon, but I do have some confidence that it will be kept alight.
Thank you. Casey back here. I wanted to just ask Bakuli a question. I apologize, I got here a few minutes late, so you may have already said this, but a little bit about what your work is, your research is, and how that's going to be continued when you go back to Madagascar.
Oh, thank you. So when I go back to Madagascar, I need to develop my skill and share it to our student. And I want to see also, because there is a KC fund, but there is no student from this KC fund knocking our door at the university. What is paleontology and what is fossil? So, and what can we do? Can we work with you? So that's my planning after when we will go back to Madagascar.
A couple of questions up here.
Can I just add to that? One thing that I didn't mention about Bakuli is that it is our hope, and we actually have an agreement with the University of Antananarivo, that she will become the collections manager of the paleontological facility at the University of Antananarivo. And we still have some things to work out, but also that she will become a professor and teach the grad students and all students, quite frankly, in things like field methods and collections management training, fossil preparation, over and above other aspects of paleontology because of the training that she's received here.
That's true.
Were there questions up here? Take a couple more questions.
My question is also for Bakuli. I wondered what you think, if you personally think that there's more that the museum should be doing, or that other institutions that have Madagascar fossils should be doing to give back to Madagascar that isn't already being done.
I don't think so that are being done, but I want to see that if there is again, so I want to know more about that.
also for Bakuli. My sense is that you're one of the people on the team that's been in Madagascar the most. Since the photo I saw of the earliest was 2016, and you might have been involved even before. So I'm just curious, looking back at the last 7+ years, you know, what are your impressions of what's been happening? What have you heard from other people? What have you heard from people not associated with the project, but benefiting from the project, and so on? Everything that you can tell us that you're willing to share about what you've observed over this period with your fellow country people.
I think everything. I have so many things to do, so I don't know which one is the first for me. So I can't tell. I can respond much better as you want, but I have so many things to do after my work here and then going back to my country.
For example, what are? Not to put you on the spot if you don't want to be. But.
Oh, okay. For example, like, what is, okay, collection and teaching our student about how to prepare fossils and then make it in science, not for just keeping at the collection, but opening in international, like, you can do this thing and you can go this way. So guides students in our university doing paleontology.
This will be the last question, I think, so we can close on time.
And this is actually for the both of you. When I went to a trade school, I learned two things. I learned how to do the trade, but I also learned how to make a living doing the trade. And my question for both of you is, to what extent have you been paying attention in your interactions with the Malagasy to do both kinds of training?
You go first.
Yeah, I, in some ways, I don't know how to answer that question. So the cool thing about having students having gone through our school system and not just being able to read and write, but actually then going on to university and acquiring a trade that they want to return to their home village and apply that is overwhelmingly heartwarming to me. I mean, they could stay in the cities and probably make as good or a better living doing that, but they choose with their education to apply that to their own village in what we hope will be sustainable ventures. And these, like the Women's Permaculture Association and the fish farm, those will also employ a good number of villagers who don't have an education. And please tell me if I'm not answering your question, because they are learning trades and they are applying them in what I regard to be very useful ways. Tarabe?
Yes, tarabe. That to me is very good. I think that's also very good for me, so I'm with you, Dave. So I don't have any suggestion or response about that.
Since it's already 2, I'd say if you have other questions, feel free to come up, make sure you see the fossils, and thank Dave for an incredible, thought-provoking lecture.
Thank you for coming up.
So who owns the fossils in Madagascar?